And the verses say, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." And so the first thing that Pastor had us put into our outline this week was be salt. Does anybody want to share what being salt means to them?
To me, being salt is, first of all, being who you are. Adding flavor to people's lives. In a good way, of course. Being used. Salt of the earth.
Yep. And so I think Pastor West shared with us when he talked about the Beatitudes, and that during his kingdom reign, Jesus wanted those who are considered fortunate, including the poor, sorrowing, humble, righteous, merciful, pure, peacemakers, and persecuted. And these are the categories of that people tend to despise or ostracize. That was a countercultural view to most people, and they probably would have thought, well, Jesus wants people to split off and withdraw from the world and form their own separate communities. But then, when Pastor Lane gave this sermon about being salt and light, well, Matthew 5:13 through 16, it disproves that notion. Disciples must be salt and light, arrested in decay and provide an illumination for a lost and dying world. Well, you can't be those things if you ostracize yourself from others. So this all had to do with, okay, this is what you are to be to the world. And then, so the first part of that, the be salt statement is, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Be salt is a statement of identity, and for that time, culturally, for Jews, this was something that they already knew, because it's part. There's the covenant identity and mission from their scriptures references the salt of the covenant, or the Davidic covenant of salt. So this was already described in their scriptures, and were in the Torah. It's talked about in Leviticus, it's talked about in Numbers, and it's talked about in 2 Chronicles. And I can get to where I can share those verses with you. But as we go on to Colossians, which is written by Paul, let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. The question I have, so Paul did learn in Acts, we find out that after Paul had his conversion, that he did learn from the disciples about Jesus and Jesus' ministry and the gospel, and then he went out and shared the gospel himself to other Jews and Gentiles. But one of the funny things is, you have to think, was Paul at the Sermon on the Mount? He was not. He was most likely, based on scholarly evidence, Paul was still in Tarsus. And when Paul came to Jerusalem, Jerusalem was different. He came to a Jerusalem after the crucifixion and after the resurrection. And to him, there was this new sect of Judaism called the Way that he didn't agree with. And so he arrested their leaders. He had them questioned. Eventually, the martyr heard around the world, Stephen, the very first martyr. He was there for that. But did the disciples necessarily share with him the Sermon on the Mount, the salt and light references? They could have, but they didn't have to, because it's all over the Old Testament. And as we all know, Paul was a Pharisee, so he knew the Old Testament very, very, very well. Leviticus 2:13 says, "Season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of your God out of your grain offerings. Add salt to all your offerings." Numbers 18 and chapter 18 verse 19 says, "Whatever is set aside from the holy offerings the Israelites present to the Lord, I give to you and your sons and daughters as a perpetual share. It is an everlasting covenant of salt before the Lord for both you and your offspring." So another covenant of salt. 2 Chronicles chapter 13 verse 5, "Don't you know that the Lord the God of Israel has given the kingship of Israel to David and his descendants forever by a covenant of salt?" So this salt reference wasn't new. It was an identity statement. It was a missional statement. Go out, be salt, keep the world from decay. They know what salt does, but it was also a statement of their identity, who they were as Jews to the thousands of people that came to the Sermon on the Mount. So, anybody want to share anything else about be salt? I'm sorry, I did go out on the tangent. We probably should turn the rabbits my direction.
Well, being salty, does that mean, to me, it means being able to go out like this thing says here, so no longer good for anything except to be thrown out. And then the next thing says, "So that you may know how to answer everyone." So it means salty means you need to know the word real good so you can go out and do battle for God.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's what Paul's talking about in Colossians. Let your conversations be always full of grace, seasoned with salt. You can, and I think we'll probably get to that with reflection, but you can go out and preach the word, but it says in 1 Peter, I believe, chapter 3, verse 15, that when you're sharing your reason for hope, that you do it with gentleness and grace. And so we're not taking our Bibles and beating somebody over the head with them. We do it with gentleness and grace, because that's the command that we use from God. And as you know, he didn't beat anybody over the head with it either. So anybody else want to share on salt? Then we have be light. Also, a statement of identity with strong biblical roots, part of Israel's covenantal identity and mission from their scriptures. There are 3 separate scriptures, and I won't go through all of them. I'll share one of them with you from Isaiah. This all coordinates with the Matthew 5:14. "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden." And it says, "It is too small a thing for you to be my servant, to restore the tribes of Jacob and bring back those of Israel I have kept. I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth." Now that's Isaiah. And it's talking about the salvation reaching to the ends of the earth, including the Gentiles. As we know, Isaiah is a book full of prophecy, and most of its prophecy revolves around the Messiah, which we all know was Jesus Christ. So, right there in Isaiah, he starts talking about light. Then we'll have this verse a little later, which I think is Isaiah 60 verses 2, and Isaiah 9, chapter 9, verse 2. And then back to Paul. Paul again writes, "For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of the light." Now, my initial thought was, well, it's not that doesn't make any sense, because Jesus said that I didn't come to abolish the law, I came to fulfill it, right? So it would be normal that he would talk about things that were in the Old Testament, things that were told by prophets and stuff. So we got the stuff from Moses, and then the stuff from Isaiah. And the funny thing was, I was like, but I don't remember right off the top of my head where that's at in the scripture. So I looked it up. Chapter 5, verse 17, right after our our verse, is is that it's, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. So I think that's what he was doing here. When he was talking about this, he mentioned right after the salt and light comment that he had come to fulfill the law, not to abolish it. So I think that was the statement he was trying to make. We sometimes separate those two. I myself, having read the Bible multiple times, did not make that connection, because usually in a Bible, it has the subheadings for what's next. It says Jesus says that he's come to fulfill the law, and then you almost read that next section like it's something separate, but it's not. Jesus said that right after he made his salt and light comments. So, does anybody have anything about light that they want to share?
Well, I think just like in the normal world, like even today, I had a moment at work where I didn't have the best Christian attitude, and then I thought about myself, and I was like, oh, that's not the right way to respond. And so I had to go back and fix it. But I think you're living that light, and you've got to show it regardless of the situation. And even with my own son, I'm noticing it. Like, he's watching everything I'm doing, and he's paying attention. So, I love that. Like, that's why you turn on a light, to shine something in your life, so.
I
That's
felt,
a little light of mine. Yeah.
so last night, as I was going to bed, I went downstairs. I had to check some laundry because we had some stuff in the dryer. Come back upstairs, and I trip on everything in the room from the door to the bed. And she's a very light sleeper, so she's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm just trying to get into bed." So, but the problem is if we're dark and our light doesn't shine, we cause other people to trip over everything in their life because we're not able to illuminate anything for them. So.